Hello everyone and welcome back to this channel. In today's lesson, we'll be covering some of the most important building blocks of Python programming. We'll be covering variables, data types, data conversion, user input, user output, and of course, we'll solve some practical exercises together so you can apply what you have learned immediately. My teaching approach is very practical. I will explain every concept step by step, write the code with you, demonstrate the outputs, and give you exercises to strengthen your understanding. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to write simple Python programs on your own. If you're excited to learn Python the right way, make sure you subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any future lesson. And if you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share with your friends who are also interested in learning Python programming. So without wasting any more time, open your code editor and let's begin our Python programming journey with variables and data type. Let's get started. The first topic that we'll be looking at in our Python programming is variables. What is a variable? A variable is a labeled storage used to hold data or information. Think of a variable as a labeled container or box that stores a value. You can use variables to store information like a student's name, a student's score, a person's age, a product price. This information can be stored in a variable. Variables allows us to store information and retrieve the information later. It also allows us to perform calculations. The values of a variable can be updated during the program execution. Next, we are going to look at how to assign a value to a variable. To assign a value to a variable, we'll be making use of the assignment operator. Now, as an exercise, we're going to create a variable and assign a value to it. So I'm going to create a variable, my name, and using the assignment operator, I'll be adding a value to the variable. So the value I'll be adding to the variable would be a string. So now what we have here is we have a variable, my name, and this is the assignment operator. Then the value inside the variable is a string called John. So John here is the value that has been added to this variable. So let's create another variable and add a value to it. So another variable I'll be creating is my age. My age, then I'm going to add a value 40. So here you can see a variable, my age, the assignment operator, then the value added to the age. Now you will notice that the value here is different from the value here. So the value here is a number, while the value here is a text. So our variable can store different types of values. It could be number, it could be text. All right, next, I'm going to create two more variables. Let me create another variable called product price. Product price. Then I will assign a value to it. I will assign a value to it. Another variable. I will also assign a value to this. Now, next, I'm going to create another variable called total. And total will be product price. So total is product price multiplied by quantity needed. So now what you can see here is that I can do some arithmetic with my variables. So product price is multiplied by quantity needed. So if I want to see the value of this, I can use a function called print to print total. So let's run this and see our output. So I'm going to run this. I'm going to see the output. So below here in our terminal, you can see the result 21,600. So the multiplication of product price and quantity needed is giving us this value. So here we have been able to prove that you can, if you have stored numbers into your variable, you can do operations. You can do mathematical operations with your variables. And using this function, we're able to print out the result, 21,600 in this case. So our variables can store values. The value can be a text called strings, or it can be numbers. Then also we can do arithmetic operations with our variables. Another information we need to note about our variables is that the values of a variable can change. The values of a variable can change. So now let me create another variable called my height. I'm going to give it a value of, I just assign a value here. Then I create another variable, the same variable, and I give it a different value. Now, if I use the function print to print the value of my height, now what's going to be the output? Is the output going to be 34.7 or is it going to be 42.5? So I'm going to run this code. By the way, let me add a comment here so that I won't be running this particular code. All right, so now I'm going to run this code to see the result of this output. So here on the terminal, you can see my output is 42.5. So 42.5 is my height. So the value of my height has been updated. Initially, it was 34.7, but because I've added a new value to the variable, I've updated the variable with 42.5. So 42.5 now becomes the new value for the variable. So the values of a variable can be updated. So now the next thing we're going to look at now is a naming convention. How do you create your variable names? How do you form your variable names? We are going to look at 4 rules in creating your variable names. There are 4 rules that you need to note when you are creating your variable name. The first rule is your variable names cannot begin with a number. Do not begin your variable names with a number. You can use letter A to Z, whether in small case or in capital case, but do not begin your variable with a number. You can also begin your variable with an underscore. It is allowed when you begin your variable name with an underscore, but do not begin your variable name with a number. That's rule 1. Do not begin your variable name with a number. Okay, so now that means that we cannot have something like okay, we cannot have something like, so this is a wrong way to form your variable name. So you cannot have one salary, rather you can have salary 1. So you can have salary 1, but you cannot have one salary, because our rule says that you cannot begin your variable name with a number. So always note that anytime you want to form your variable, do not begin your variable name with a number. So another rule that we'll be looking at in creating your variable name is variable name cannot contain spaces. You cannot have spaces in between variable name. So if I want to create a variable name called student name, so it will be wrong for me to have student space name. It will be wrong for me to have student space name. So this is a wrong way of forming my variable. So rather than saying student space name, you can say student underscore name. So student underscore name is a better convention. Do not use student space name, because rule number 2 says spaces is not allowed in between words. So you need to connect these 2 words together with an underscore. You cannot even use an hyphen. Don't use an hyphen. Rather, use underscore. Use underscore. So rule number 2, variable's name cannot contain spaces. So do not use spaces in between variable names. Rule number 3, special characters are not allowed. When you are creating your variable names, do not use special characters. Okay, like you want to have salary, so salary hash, something like this. Do not use special characters when creating your variable name. Do not use special characters. things like this. You don't do things like this while creating your variable name. So these are wrong ways. Do not use special characters when creating variable names. Then the fourth rule is while creating your variable names, do not use Python keywords. While creating your variable names, do not use Python keywords. So there are some keywords that are reserved for Python programming, which you cannot use to create your variable. For instance, you cannot have, it's inappropriate to have a variable name called class, because class is a keyword, is a reserved word in Python. Class is a reserved word in Python. It has a special meaning in Python. So you cannot use class as a variable name. So there are other keywords. I'll be sharing with you some common keywords that you cannot use as your variable names. So as a beginner, you need to note these words. You need to know these words so that you don't use them in creating your variable names. So that's rule number 4. All right. So as a summary to this, so variable names cannot contain numbers. We have said that variable names cannot contain numbers. You can use letters. You can start your variable names with letters, but it cannot start with a number. Then also we said spaces is not allowed in between variable names. You are creating your variable names, spaces is not allowed. So instead of using spaces, use underscore, use underscore. Then rule number 3, we said special characters. Don't use special characters while creating your variables. Like don't use special characters in your variable names. Number 3. Then number 4, we said some keywords, some reserved words cannot be used as your variable names. So those are the rules you need to note while creating your variable names. So another information we'll be learning about variables is the naming styles. So we're going to be learning the naming styles. How can you create a very good variable name? So we're going to be learning the naming styles. So there are 3 very common naming styles used in creating variables. The first style is called the snake case. Snake case. So creating a variable using the snake case style is something like this. Okay, so then name. Okay, so let me put a text here. Okay, so these are examples of the use of student snake case. These are examples of the use of snake case. So you can see the first word is starting with a small letter, then the second word is also starting with a small letter, and the 2 words are linked with underscore. So this kind of naming style is called the snake case. So it's a recommended, it's a very popular way of writing, of forming your variable names. So you can use the snake case. Another method is using what we call the camel case. For the camel case, you would observe that the first word is starting with a small letter, while the next word is starting with a capital letter. So I'm not using space, I'm not using underscore in between words, but you will ensure that the first word starts with a small letter and the next word starts with a capital letter. So you can see student name, total score, monthly salary. So small letter M, capital letter S. So this is called the camel case. It's also a very recommended way of style of forming your variable names. So in case you have 3 words, okay, you can say, let's assume I want to say my monthly salary. So using the camel case, how are you going to write my monthly salary? So my monthly salary. So in case you want to combine 3 words, so you can see my monthly salary. So starting with a small letter, then capital letter for the first word, capital letter for the second word. So my monthly salary. So this is camel case. Then the third method is Pascal case. So for Pascal case, you start with a capital letter. So you can say student record. You can say employee salary. All right. Here you will notice that it's starting with a capital letter. Each first word starts with a capital letter. Student, then record, capital letter. Employee starts with a capital letter. Salary, S, capital letter, salary for salary. So these are the three different naming styles while forming your variable names, especially variable names that has two or more words. So you can use the snake case, you can use the camel case, and you can use the Pascal case. So using these three styles, you can be able to form an effective, very good variable names. So now that we have much in-depth knowledge about variable names, so we are going to look at 4 examples of good variable names and another 4 examples of what we will term as poor variable names. So let's create our 4 good variable names. So you can say student name. Okay, so we can term this as a good variable names. Okay, good variable name. So this is the snake case. You can have another one, course code. Course code. So this can also be termed as a good variable name. Then you can have unit price. I want to say unit price. So you can unit price. Okay. So this is a good variable name. Good variable name. Then average score. You want to write average score. So average score. So this is another variable name that you can type, you can term as a good variable name. So this is using the snake case. You can see snake case, small letter, linked with underscore. This is another use of snake case, small letter, linked with underscore. Then the camel case, small letter U, capital letter P. This camel case. Then this is Pascal case, capital letter A, capital letter S. So these are very good variable names. So now let's look at another 4 examples of poor variable names. So you want to create a variable name and you say something like this. This is a poor variable name. Another one is you say so this is a poor variable name. So creating variable name in this way, it's poor. So what makes it poor? Because what makes it poor is because the variable name does not have any particular meaning. So you cannot really relate, even though it's acceptable. Creating this, you can see it's acceptable, but the variable name does not have any particular meaning. Creating a variable name and naming it as A, naming it as X, naming it as B, naming it as something that does not have any particular meaning. It's not a meaningful name. It's not a meaningful name. You cannot really relate with the names. So anytime you are creating your variable names, always use names, variable name that you can really relate with. Really relate with in terms of the value corresponds with the variable name. So if I say student name, the value can be something like, okay, this is a name, this is a name. So if you say course code, so course code, can be, okay, course code. So unit price can be, okay, average score. So here you can see that the values have a corresponding meaning to the variable name. So this is the name, this is the name. So student name, then our course code, unit price, average score. But in this case, the variable name does not have any particular meaning that I can relate with. So anytime you are creating your variable names, always use variable names that you can relate with in terms of the value. So that makes your code much more meaningful. All right, so in the exercises, in this particular video so far, we have learned a lot about variables and how to write an effective variables. So if you have enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to this video, give it a like, share your comments on the comment section, and make sure you refer to your friends. So see you in the next video.